What's up, indie fans? I'm Haz, and welcome to Indie Studies. One thing I absolutely love about music, and the indie scene in particular, is how communal it is. And I don't just mean going to shows and sharing in that experience with so many other people, but those late-night hangouts with friends, where someone puts on a new artist they found last week. Or when someone you know uses a song on their Instagram story, and they end up introducing you to your new favorite artist. This act of spreading new or interesting music around is so incredibly important, especially for indie artists. These moments of sharing what you're currently listening to with the world happen all the time now. Think about when Spotify Wrapped comes out in December, and seemingly all anyone posts about for like 3 days is who their top artists were this year. It's so fun and engaging, but most importantly, it's really easy to do. This ability to easily share new artists you like, new music you've found, all of that is a relatively new thing. Before streaming platforms gave you recommendations for new artists based on songs you've liked in the past, before social media allowed us to show our friends what we're listening to, and allowed artists to directly promote their work to fans, before iPods, burnt CDs, and mixtapes allowed us to take specific songs off of different albums and listen to different artists back to back without interruptions, before all of this, independent artists were still out there searching for their next fan and sharing their art, hoping it would find its audience. How our indie musician friends have shared their music over the last half century is what we're going to be talking about today. Like I mentioned last episode, the Buzzcocks had to borrow money from friends and family to press Spiral Scratch. Vinyl pressing was a fairly complicated and certainly expensive way to be able to share your music. The 7 or 12-inch discs we think of when someone mentions vinyl date back to the 1930s. But the way a piece of plastic with little grooves cut into it can output the beautiful, complex, intricate sounds of music is something that I think is just as fascinating as the songs that are coming through the speakers. Without delving too much into physics, sound travels in waves, and those waves can be visualized. What the grooves of a record essentially are those waveforms pressed into plastic. So as your needle moves around the disc, it is being ever so slightly moved around to indicate the differences in sound. It is some wildly impressive physics, and I'm still absolutely amazed that it somehow works. But the process of getting these grooves into a vinyl record is just as complex. Let's say a band has recorded their EP. Songs are written, they love the way it sounds. They want you to listen to it. They send their recordings to a company that makes records, and the company cuts the grooves, those waveforms of every guitar note you hear, every trill of the lead singer's voice, every crash of a cymbal. All of that is carved by a diamond needle into a soft lacquer plate. This plate is then coated in silver to help strengthen it, to keep it from breaking when it goes through the pressing process, and it's then put through a nickel bath, which raises the grooves. This lacquer plate is now called a stamper. It's what's used to physically imprint those grooves into the records we get to play at home. Pucks of the vinyl plastic are then heated to like 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and when the press is released, the vinyl record that comes out is an exact copy from the stamper plate. As you can imagine, even though it's been coated to protect it in general, this process of having 2,000 pounds per square inch of force laid upon the stamper disc over and over again leads to wear and tear, and a decrease in its effectiveness. Each stamp really only works for about 1,500 to 2,000 records. Thinking back to that success from Spiral Scratch, where the Buzzcocks sold more than 15,000 copies, this entire process had to be recreated at least 10 times to make all of those different copies. This takes a lot of time and costs a fair amount of money. Money that independent artists usually didn't have to spare. This large investment needed to print copies was a huge deterrent for independent artists during the time. This was all happening at a very interesting time in music too. Every once in a while, how we listen to music changes. It happens way more frequently now. So maybe we're all just used to the fact that every so often, the physical way we listen to music completely changes. But for about 30 to 35 years, since vinyl records first came out in 1930, your only option to listen to pre-recorded music was a vinyl record. What radio stations were broadcasting was the recording from a record, usually a 45, being played in the studio. Even though pre-recorded cassettes came out in the mid-60s, it wasn't until the late 70s that they really became popular, even after 77 when Spiral Scratch was released. And then it took another several years until 1985 for them to become the most common way of listening to a record, when they finally overtook vinyls in sales. That is 55 years of absolute dominance by vinyl. I say this was an interesting time in music because when Spiral Scratch came out, it was the beginning of the decline for vinyl. Cassettes had been out for 10 years, and while vinyl was still by far the most popular way to listen to music, cassettes were coming in fast. This was the first time since the creation of the modern music scene that the way we consume music was changing. And this change made it more accessible for independent artists to share their music with the world. Despite looking incredibly different, the theory behind how vinyl and cassettes work is actually pretty similar. The sound waves are marked in some way onto a product, and then those waves are read off that item and broadcast through your speakers. Like we've mentioned, with vinyl, this involves etching a groove into plastic, so that when a needle moves around it, it interacts with the waves. With cassettes, this is somehow done with magnets. Again, another miracle of physics. If you guys want an episode where I explain how this stuff works, let me know. Leave a comment here or hit me up on socials to tell me. If there's enough interest, I'll make an episode all about the science behind experiencing sound. But physics lessons aside, the theory is the same. The sound waves are read and converted into the music we hear coming through our speakers. This process of recording onto cassettes has two really important things for indie musicians. First, it's possible to do on your own. It has a few steps that we'll talk about in a minute, but recording and reproducing cassettes is much easier than vinyl, and something a band could actually do on their own. The second, and potentially more important change cassettes brought to the indie world, is that music was now portable. Things like portable radios existed, and you absolutely could take one with you on the go. Listen to a station, and even throw some headphones on, drown out the world, and just vibe with the DJ. There were even fully compact and portable record players that came with built-in speakers, so you could listen to your favorite albums anywhere. Both of these had their own drawbacks, though. These portable record players were still fairly big and bulky. Plus, you also had to bring all the records you may want to play with you. That's a lot of stuff to bring along. Portable radios were certainly way easier to bring along, and by the mid-60s, they were compact enough that you could put one in your jacket pocket before you left. Their downside comes from choice. You're at the mercy of whatever that specific DJ on whatever station you were listening to happened to be playing that day, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does also mean you had to be somewhere you could pick up a station. So if you're out camping in the middle of nowhere, or heading to work on the subway, you probably weren't picking up a signal. But this all changed in 1979 when Sony introduced the Walkman. Now you could listen to the specific album you wanted to, on the go, anywhere, in an incredibly compact and convenient way. As we all know, this absolutely took off. And now throwing in some headphones to listen to music, or even this podcast, is an everyday occurrence. In a different light, the Walkman also changed the way we share music with each other, and talk about music with each other too. The question, what are you listening to, moved from meaning what bands or genres are you enjoying lately, to what was actively playing in your ears before I walked up. And if that friend who stopped to ask you what you're listening to seemed interested in your answer, you could let them borrow the tape in its protective case and not really have to worry in the back of your mind that it might get damaged. And if you brought a few tapes to listen to on your walk or commute, you could even hand them the tape then and there. This is incredibly important because word-of-mouth recommendations are the biggest way indie bands grow, even now. Your friend telling you that you should check something out will almost always get you to do so. And you're even more likely to when they tell you it's a new artist they saw at a show the other night, and like so much, they bought their tape that night directly from the artist before they hand you said tape. I think it's safe to say Spiral Scratch wouldn't have sold all those copies in its initial run without fans telling other people about it. The same is true for the independent musicians we're all falling in love with now. But the ease with which you can put that music directly into someone's hands was revolutionized with cassettes. It was also significantly easier to make cassettes than vinyl for an indie artist. All they needed was a tape player, a tape recorder, and a few cables to connect them together, push play on the tape player, and record on the tape recorder, and boom. By the time the first tape finishes playing, you have an exact copy. And it's potentially even easier if you have a deck that both plays and records, with individual slots for each. Decks which were pretty common for musicians to have. There was no more waiting for a company to ship hundreds of copies back to you. No more paying for a diamond stylus to cut out your music into a disc before it's covered in silver and dipped in nickel and then pressed into copies over and over again with the same force as an alligator bite. Once you have your first recording, it's 2 buttons and you're ready to go. Independent artists jumped at this. Everything from demo tapes to EPs to full albums were now showing up from bands you'd never heard of. Artists could easily make a couple dozen copies to sell at a gig they picked up opening for a band that came to town, or even just busking on the street. It was now realistically possible for a band to record an entire catalog without ever signing with a label, spending entire careers doing everything by themselves. The indie movement may have started in January of 1977, but the era of the independent musician really began in the 80s as cassettes took off. This ability to do everything yourself has only become easier and more accessible as time has gone on as well. In the same way that cassettes took a long time to become our society's primary way of listening to music, CDs went through a very similar time of finding themselves in the world and customers catching up with owning the technology required to play them. CDs are so quintessentially a 90s piece of technology to many of us. But CDs were invented in 1982, and it would take nearly a decade until 1991 for CDs to overtake cassettes in total sales. CDs marked the transition of the music world from the analog to the digital age. You no longer needed a physical copy of your original recording to make more copies of your record. All indie artists needed to do was have some software. Tell the software what audio files go on the disc and in what order. The software did all the rest. Granted, computers in the 90s and early 2000s were incredibly slow by today's standards. Burning your record onto a dozen or so CDs was a multi-hour job. So if it wasn't saving them a lot of time, why would indie artists move over to CDs? Well, in addition to them being the preferred method of listening to music during this time, CDs did have another huge advantage. Because these files are digital, you don't have any wear and tear on the master recording that you're copying. With vinyl, the stamper plates would eventually wear down or break, usually after more than 1,000 copies had been made, but still, the physical object being used to make the copies of your record had a shelf life, and once it was worn down or broken, new ones had to be made, which again costs artists time and money. With cassettes, the physical tape that's running through and being read by the tape player gets a little worn down each time it passes through, so each copy is slightly lower quality than the original. It's negligible, and for most people, impossible to tell if the two copies were made relatively close to each other in a run. But for bands who are making their money by selling these tapes, making, let's say, 500 to 1,000 copies of their album, it does become noticeable. And once that original tape is damaged or worn, you need to record from scratch onto another one, or record off of an earlier copy that you made. With CDs, this was no longer a problem. The quality of your recording was the exact same from the first copy to the 10,000th. It also meant that for your fans and listeners, their copy never deteriorated either. Vinyls warp if they're left outside in a garage, and cassettes wear down just as that master track does, or the tape comes off the track after repeated and frequent use. These products lose fidelity and quality over time. With a CD, as long as the disc stays intact and doesn't somehow get damaged, it is almost a guarantee that the quality of your music will be the exact same 15 years down the road as it was the day someone bought it. As technology progressed, the primary way of listening to music changed once more as well. I'm not going to differentiate between the ways that MP3 players and our current streaming method of listening to music today work, because the main difference is really where those files are physically stored. With MP3 players, the file was downloaded onto your device, and with streaming, they're stored in servers somewhere that you access whenever you open your preferred app. But what you are listening to is the same. MP3s are digital audio files that are kind of unique in the fact that they can be compacted. How compacting files works is something I don't understand, but we'll happily learn for that episode on the tech and science of listening to music if enough of you out there want to learn about it. The important part is even on very early MP3 players, you could download and store an incredibly large number of songs and albums. The biggest change in how we listen to music here became portability. Even with cassettes and the Walkman, you still had to bring multiple things along with you. You had to bring however many different tapes you might want to listen to, the device itself. And if you wanted to hear one specific song, you either had to listen to that entire album just to hear it, or fast forward to when it started, which, as you can probably imagine, or maybe remember, usually involved fast forwarding and stopping multiple times to figure out where you were in the album, and usually some rewinding too. CDs were pretty similar in the fact that you had to bring multiple discs with you if you wanted to listen to more than one album wherever you were going. Getting to a specific track was way easier thanks to the skip functions, but it was still an inconvenient way to listen to music by today's standard. With MP3 players and the systems that have grown since their adoption, you can access albums by so many different artists and move through and pick the specific song you want to hear, listen to it, and then go pick another song by a totally different artist, all on this one device. Indie artists again took full advantage of this change. Today, we find their music on SoundCloud, Spotify, or Apple Music. But in the early 2000s, it wasn't unusual for the album you bought from an indie artist to be a little card that directed you to a website to download the artist's album onto your MP3 player. Again, cutting down the cost for indie artists, and in this case, drastically cutting down the time of making the physical item that an artist sells. I think this is a big reason why we have seen a huge increase in fully independent artists over the last 2 decades. Building a full career without the backing or support from a label has only become more accessible over time. That time has drastically changed the way we physically interact with music. Through all these changes, though, one thing has always stayed the same. You. Indie music needs fans like you to be successful. There are no advances for making an album when a band is the ones performing, producing, and selling that album themselves. There are no ticket sales for a tour without fans in the audience cheering an artist on. A lot of very creative people, musicians, writers, painters, animators, any type or style of artist, make a first thing because they love doing it, but a lot less produce a second thing. The ones that do keep putting their art out there do so because they know it has an audience, that it is appreciated and valued and matters to people out there. So next time you're hanging out with your friends and they hand you the aux cord or ask you to connect to the Bluetooth speaker by the fire pit, put on a few songs by that indie artist you just discovered and tell your friends why you like them. It really does make a big difference. And if you're looking for new indie musicians to support, writers to read, or games to download, check out the other shows here on the Indie Bubble Network. We have great interviews with artists all across a bunch of different mediums. And follow both the Indie Studies podcast and the Indie Bubble Network on social media. Check out the show notes for links to our pages. If you want to learn more about anything we talked about in this episode, links to the sources we used when making it can be found in the show notes as well. And most importantly, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Indie Studies.